Oppenheimer transformed Sunday's Oscar ceremony from a competition into a coronation, winning 7 out of 13 nominations, the most of any film this year. The atomic bomb biopic is the highest-grossing Best Picture winner in 20 years and one of the highest ever, with nearly $1 billion in global box office receipts. A rare critical and commercial success, Oppenheimer cements director Christopher Nolan's status as the most bankable auteur in Hollywood. Joining me now to discuss is Forbes reporter Matt Craig. Matt, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Brittany. It's been a while, but I'm excited to talk Oscars with you.
It has been a while, and I'm likewise excited to talk Oscars with you. It was a fun night on Sunday night. It was especially fun if you were part of Oppenheimer, who won the most Oscars at the 96th Academy Awards. Were you surprised with the outcome there?
Oppenheimer pretty much cleaned up at every award show leading up to the Oscars. PGAs, DGAs, really anywhere they were handing out trophies, Oppenheimer was picking them up. So they were a massive favorite to win Best Picture. They did slightly, I think, underperform from what some people thought. They had 13 nominations. They ended up only winning 7 awards. Still tied for the most in Universal's history as a Universal movie. I think the most in Slumdog Millionaire of any of the Best Picture winners to win 7 trophies. So they were a dominant movie all award season. And commercially, they did pretty well, too.
I want to talk about that because they were a dominant movie in the box office over the summer. One of the most fun elements of this year was Barbenheimer, when Barbie came out the same weekend Oppenheimer did. Can you talk a little bit about that financial success of Oppenheimer and why it was so significant?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like the dream for the Oscars, is to have movies that are commercially relevant actually be competing. Oftentimes it's movies that gross, $5 million at the box office, and now you've got movies that are grossing $1 billion at the box office. How the Barbenheimer phenomenon came about, there will be probably books written about that for the next 10 years, 20 years of Hollywood history. But I think it was just a perfect synergy of a lot of different things. I think you could honestly say that Barbie probably helped Oppenheimer the most. Barbie was probably going to be a phenomenon no matter what, and they maybe brought Oppenheimer along with them to a certain extent. However, the fact that people went out to see Christopher Nolan's 2.5 hour or 2 hour and 45-minute movie about a theoretical physicist multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times, certainly speaks to the way people like that movie.
It's really interesting because when you think of Oppenheimer and you think of Barbie, I saw both on Barbenheimer weekend. You really can't get 2 different movies. One is more fun about Barbie's dreamland. Another one is a little more dark about the atomic bomb. So tell us a little bit more about the studio's decision to release them both on the same weekend.
Yeah, well, actually, Margot Robbie addressed this in an actors conversation with Cillian Murphy, saying that Chuck Roven, one of the producers of Oppenheimer, called her to say, "Hey, can you move your date to a different release date?" And she was like, "No, if you're scared, then you can move your date." And it kind of became this rivalry that I think obviously both of them benefited from greatly. And these days, so much of a movie can be, won or lost on TikTok and on social media. And the rivalry of that helped play up the drama, I think, a little bit, and got people talking about the movies. There was just a huge name recognition for both titles, and kind of the discussions of, well, which one are you going to see? Which one are you going to see first? Are you going to see them both on the same day? I mean, I'm someone who loves movies. I go to the movies, once a week, and my friends never want to go with me. And then suddenly they're talking about seeing 2 movies in the same day. It's crazy, the phenomenon that movie had. And honestly, I don't think it's very replicable. I mean, every studio right now is trying to come up with a way to do Barbenheimer 2.0, but I think it was just the confluence of many factors, including the fact that both these movies were very good. I mean, popularity and quality do not always go hand in hand. And in this case, 2 popular movies that ended up, being well respected and nominated for Best Picture.
2 Best Picture nominees. We saw that rivalry really on the stage last night, even with Emily Blunt, who was in Oppenheimer, Ryan Gosling, who was in Barbie, joking around, ribbing each other a bit on stage. And I want to talk about someone who has name recognition too. That's Oppenheimer's director, Christopher Nolan. You wrote this about him. You called him, quote, Hollywood's most bankable auteur. So what sets him apart in the industry right now?
Yeah, I actually thought it was very interesting that it was Steven Spielberg who handed out that Best Director Oscar over to Christopher Nolan in the night, because in many ways Christopher Nolan is the new Steven Spielberg, someone who is beloved by critics and audiences alike, commercial and critical consensus, which is very rare. I mean, especially at the Oscars again, which not oftentimes honors a lot of art house and smaller and more niche movies, I guess you could say. Christopher Nolan's a guy that makes movies that gross $500 million plus. I mean, he's done 3 superhero movies, superhero movies which are not respected at all. And after The Dark Knight did not get nominated for Best Picture, they changed the rules of the Academy to go from 5 Best Picture nominees to 10, so that hopefully you would get more commercial movies in the mix. So Christopher Nolan is someone that has had an outsized impact on the movie industry as a whole. And today, right now, I mean, he is, in my opinion, the most powerful man, or the most powerful creative in Hollywood, because he has the ability to turn, any movie into a blockbuster and turn any blockbuster into a critical darling. And very, very few people can do that, including Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg's last 2 movies have underperformed at the box office. West Side Story, I think, grossed 75 million. Fableman's less than 50 million. And Christopher Nolan can make a similar prestige movie gross 950 million. So he is the guy right now. He is the giant in the room.
That's funny how you describe that. It's almost like a passing of the torch between Spielberg to Nolan. And I am curious, you wrote for Forbes that that Christopher Nolan bet on himself with Oppenheimer. So can you talk about that financial bet and how exactly it paid off?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to make it sound too dramatic, because Christopher Nolan's already a rich man and a powerful man. I mean, he's doing okay. But I think when you think about, again, a 2-hour, 45-minute movie in black and white, part of it, about a theoretical physicist, it does not jump off the page at you as being, a commercial success. And yet he took it into the open market. He broke up with Warner Brothers, which, I'm sure we can talk about, but took this movie into the open market to bidders across all of Hollywood, landed it with Universal, and the way that deal was structured is first dollar gross, which again is kind of an industry term that just means rather than the studio making back all its money and then paying out profits to people that own a piece of the back end participation, he literally is a partner with the studio and getting a percentage of revenues from the very beginning. However, the way those deals are structured means that any money he was paid up front, like, hey, here's a certain amount of millions of dollars to direct this movie, write this movie, produce this movie. I mean, he had his fingerprints all over it. That's just an advance against the back end. So he took less money up front and said, hey, I think this movie is going to be very successful, so I'll take that back end participation against my upfront money, and clearly blew way past it. I mean, we don't know what the upfront was, somewhere maybe in the $10 million range. And then that back end participation grossed $85 million after paying fees to his agent and manager. He took home, we estimate, around $72 million, which for a filmmaker has got to be, up there with any payday that anyone's ever gotten.
Absolutely a huge payday. And you did touch on that breakup between Christopher Nolan and Warner Brothers. They had an almost 2-decade-long relationship there. So can you talk about his partnership with Warner Brothers and why he ultimately decided to leave?
Yeah, I mean, he was Warner Brothers' golden boy. I mean, for the same reasons that we just were explaining. Every single movie he made was performing on both fronts, commercially and critically. Every single movie he made with Warner's grossed over $100 million, most of them over $500 million. He was the cornerstone of the studio going forward, and it's a studio that prides itself on stars. However, when the COVID pandemic hit, they made the decision that they were going to put every single one of their releases for 2020 or 2021, on their streaming service, which at the time was called HBO Max, is now called Max. The same day that they came out in theaters. So essentially every movie became a streaming movie. And Christopher Nolan, who is like Mr. Theatrical experience, the idea of like seeing something that's not even shot on film, is shot in digital, is like appalling to him, right? This is so offensive that he actually goes public to the Hollywood Reporter, and his quote, I don't remember exactly, but it was basically like, filmmakers and actors thought they were working for the greatest film studio, and now they're working for the worst streaming service, which is something that you just do not hear people say. People do not light any bridges on fire because they think these are the people that are going to have to give me money. Christopher Nolan, who has never lacked any confidence, clearly thought that he would be fine criticizing the studio, and he was. So he took his next movie out, which would become Oppenheimer, to the open market, and there was a handful of studios that were just chomping at the bit to work with him because of his track record, and because of that, he had the leverage to land, a very, very advantageous deal. Again, betting on himself that he would be successful. If Oppenheimer wasn't successful, this would have been. I don't know that I would say a disaster. Like, again, he's doing fine, but this would have been a huge reputational hit for him if Oppenheimer had failed, because he really, really believed in himself with this project, and it paid off. It paid off in spades.
Believed in himself so much that he essentially almost bit the hand that fed him. It all worked out, obviously, as you said, in spades. Right. But do you think that his decision to express that disappointment in streaming impacted the industry's perception of streaming at all?
I think, no. I think actually streaming's has hurt its own reputation. Has proven to have some flaws. At the time in 2020, Warner Brothers was not the only media company that was doubling down on streaming. Everyone wanted to. They called it like walled gardens. Everyone wanted to build the best streaming service and have people come subscribe to them. Now it's proving to not be the best business model. Christopher Nolan has proven to be correct. I don't know exactly how much he was thinking about the business side of it. I think he was thinking of it more from the sanctity of film. But I think streaming services now have proven it's very, very hard to make big budget movies worth it when they're on streaming. They have to kind of make money from theatrical, and also pouring tons and tons of money into a low margin business like streaming has proven to be difficult. And now you see things that would have seemed crazy back in 2020, like Warner Brothers licensing its properties to Netflix. Now you get HBO shows that you can watch on Netflix because Warner Brothers likes those paychecks coming in, those properties producing money. When you have them on your own service, you're paying from your left hand into your right hand, and it's not really producing money in the way that they thought. So I would say, did Christopher Nolan's comments change the tide of that? No, I think business and the way that the streaming services have gone have proven him correct with those comments. And if anything, he comes out of it seeming, like the one on the right side of history and more powerful than ever.
As we're sitting here post Oppenheimer, when Christopher Nolan clearly won, he's looking more powerful than ever. Is Warner Brothers doing anything to repair that relationship, or is that bridge just completely burned, decimated? What does that look like?
No. Even Christopher Nolan's even said that he would be open to working with Warner Brothers again. You talk about a 20-year relationship, and being one of the foundational pieces of the film studio that doesn't just go away. But Warner Brothers is actively trying to repair that relationship. One thing that we do know is that they've sent a 7-figure royalty check to Christopher Nolan, no strings attached, as part of his back-end participation for Tenet, which was the movie that came out in 2021 that went straight to the streaming service. The other thing that they have done is put Tenet into IMAX theaters over the past month, partially to ride the wave of Chris Nolan momentum, because clearly everyone wants to celebrate him around this Oppenheimer phenomenon, but also because, if you think about it, what hurt that relationship in the first part was them not wanting to put Tenet into theaters. So now, if you're Warner Brothers, you think, well, we'll put it in IMAX theaters now and try to make up for the mistake that we made in 2021. So they are doing all they can. They also said publicly, Michael DeLuca, the film studio boss over there, said publicly, we want to have Christopher Nolan back. So this is not a very veiled or sneaky attempt here. They're sending him money. They're putting his movie in theaters. They're saying publicly they want to have him back. I think Christopher Nolan's next deal, if he's smart, he'll take it into the open market again. Will be even bigger and even better, because if anything, he has more people who want his services next time around.
Let's talk about the future a bit there and what he's going to be working on next, or who he's going to be working on his next project with. How will the success of Oppenheimer impact the battle for whatever he's working on next?
Yeah, I mean, in Hollywood, things move up and down very quickly. Like one project can make you the hottest actor in town, or can make no one want to work with you. Obviously, people talk about like director jail. If you have a big bomb. So in the case of him, he won Best Director, he won Best Picture, he grossed $1 billion. You literally could not ask for anything more than what Christopher Nolan did with Oppenheimer. And so obviously he's going to go away for a while and write the next script and think of the next phenomenon that and I'm sure in his mind, like he has no doubt that he's going to be able to come up with something else that's giant spectacle that is beloved by everyone. But he's going to go away for a while and write that. When he's ready to bring that to market, I guarantee you every single studio will at least inquire about their chances. It's kind of like if Michael Jordan becomes a free agent, or LeBron James becomes a free agent every single year, because unless he's locked down to a long-term contract, every single project, every single studio has a chance to bid on, which only drives that deal value up and up and up. So Universal, who just produced this movie with him, and Donna Langley was thanked many times from the stage last night. I think she's going to be very hard to knock out of the incumbency because she had so much success with that movie. However, Warner Brothers will be coming in very strong. Not to mention Paramount, Sony, Apple. I mean, every single person that's ever made a movie in Hollywood was going to want to work with Christopher Nolan next time.
You touched on before that Christopher Nolan really is an advocate for the cinematic experience, and that's where his criticisms of Warner Brothers originally stemmed from. He urged viewers to see Oppenheimer on IMAX or own it on Blu-ray. So how has that been received by audience and the industry alike?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is part of his narrative. Part of his Oscar narrative became, hey, I am this crusader for movies. I think in the story I said, protecting the sanctity of the cinematic experience. I mean, I think that is part of his brand at this point. Not just IMAX, but 70 millimeter IMAX, which is like the largest film format. I don't know if you saw any of those photos or videos of like how big that 70 millimeter film reel was for Oppenheimer, but it was like 100 pounds or something, and not just Blu-ray, but 4K Blu-ray, right? He really wants you to have, the religious experience of seeing something on the biggest possible screen. And audiences are eating this up. I mean, 20% of Oppenheimer's box office gross was through IMAX. It was the fourth biggest IMAX movie of all time. The movie sold out of its 4K Blu-rays within a week, I think like 2 or 3 days. And Universal was scrambling to restock those. So everything Chris Nolan says, he's like a cult leader almost among cinephiles right now, where like if he tells you to do something, you do it and you trust him. And so he has that influence too to bring to a negotiation. If you're his agent, you're bringing this up every time someone wants to do business with you. You're like, hey, not only can he bring people in the theaters, he can get them in 70 million, the biggest theaters. He can get them buying Blu-rays later. Like he has so much power and leverage over anyone who says they love movies right now. That's he's certainly going to be using that anytime he's negotiating.
And if you are seeing the atomic bomb, you certainly do want to see it in IMAX. It is a different experience.
Yeah, I think this is something that is not talked about enough with Nolan, is that he has these like kind of heady movie concepts or like hard to understand things. Oftentimes you walk out of a Christopher Nolan movie and you need to like read stuff on the internet about like what does this mean that I just said. Especially stuff like Interstellar or Inception, movies like that you need them explained to you, but they have that level of spectacle that does bring people into theaters. You want to see like that visual of like the street in Paris bending on top of itself in Inception, or going through the black hole in Interstellar, or the stadium crumbling in Dark Knight Rises, right? He always has some big spectacle moment that you want to go to the biggest theater to see. And I know in the case of Oppenheimer, people did not know what that movie was about. People did not read American Prometheus, the book, before they went to see Oppenheimer, right? They went to see Oppenheimer because they were like, there's an atomic bomb that's going to go off at some point in this movie. And then, he's able to Trojan horse in some of like the more intelligent or risky movie concepts, and people go along for the ride because, it is so entertaining.
Can you talk about what do you think you could attribute his success to, especially when it comes to Oppenheimer? Because to your point, it's a 3-hour movie based on science, based on physics. That's a hard sell to get butts in seats. So what's his success?
What sold people on Oppenheimer was actually the name of the brand of Christopher Nolan, his track record. I think people at this point, they have seen Inception, they've seen Interstellar, they like these movies, they'll go see another Christopher Nolan movie and trust him, which is what I was trying to get at in the piece. I had one manager tell me that he's the biggest movie star in the world right now. I think that's a pretty good comp, because like if Tom Cruise comes out with a movie, you don't necessarily need to know what the movie is about. You're like, Tom Cruise is in it, so I know what to expect. There's going to be stunts, there's going to be crazy action. We're going to get, big movie star performance. Same thing with Christopher Nolan at this point. People are like, okay, I know it's about a physicist, but I'm sure there's going to be explosions in this at some point, and so I think that is, again, that speaks to the power and the leverage that Christopher Nolan has at this point, that he has that kind of stature. Because, as you're saying, if someone was reading the plot synopsis to you of Oppenheimer and be like, hey, do you want to go see this movie? You're kind of like, well, I didn't pay attention in my high school science class, so like, what, how is this going to appeal to me, right? But it's Christopher Nolan, and on top of that, because he is Christopher Nolan, people want to work with him. So you do have the benefit of having lots of movie stars in all his movies, and in this case, Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, Casey Affleck. I mean, if you think about even the amount of characters that were in one scene or two scenes, you had Rami Malek, who just won an Oscar a couple of years ago, and he was in 2 scenes of this movie. So he has an amazing amount of pull, both with the audiences and with the actors on the industry side of things.
His name being attached to that really sold it. His name, I mean, Christopher Nolan. I do now want to pivot to an Oscars adjacent story you published a little bit ago, and it's the highest paid actors of 2023 list for Forbes. And there was a few actors who were in the best picture movies who made the cut. Yes, I'm looking at you. Barbie, Oppenheimer, and Killers of the Flower Moon. Were those the blockbuster successes of those movies? Did that help their fortunes rise last year?
Yes. Well, the thing I'll say is the fortunes don't care about critical consensus. The fortunes don't care about awards nominations. I mean, I think the fact that our number one was Adam Sandler kind of proves that point. That's these two things are not often connected. The thing I would just say is that this is exactly what the Oscars hopes happens, is that you have movies that can be blockbuster successes and also get awards nominations. So in the case of of Barbie and Oppenheimer, anyways, you have big commercial success tied to these awards. The thing I'll say with all the people that you mentioned, Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't even nominated, and the other two didn't win, right? So I do still think that there is some. I mean, Margot Robbie wasn't nominated for an actress; she was nominated as a producer, right? So I do think that there is maybe some bias towards art house movies, or movies that are seen as like more artistic achievements, and oftentimes that's like coded for not everyone gets it but we do, sort of thing, and so there may be some bias there. However, you did see these movies make a lot of money. In the case of Killers of the Flower Moon, we don't really know since it went to Apple TV Plus, but you had the combination of Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. And so they have, again, we talk about leverage. Leverage equals money in Hollywood. And so for them, they were able to get really nice paydays out of those. And if you're the Academy, you're like praying that, Greta Gerwig keeps making big movies and Christopher Nolan keeps making big movies and Martin Scorsese keeps making big movies, because they're the kind of people who can, and there's very, very few that can bring audiences to theaters and make a good product.
Adam Sandler wasn't nominated last night. How is he the highest paid actor of 2023?
Yeah, Adam Sandler is an interesting case because he's been working with Netflix since 2014, and he basically moved over there after many, many years at Sony, making these theatrical hits that everyone knows, oftentimes comedies, oftentimes family comedies or dumb comedies. Let's be honest, right? Netflix signs him up to just a huge amount of money for a four-picture deal, and his movies just become mega hits on Netflix. I think the thing that I wanted to point out in that story was, hey, this was the year of Barbenheimer for sure. This is everyone talked about Barbie and Oppenheimer, but in the Netflix engagement report where they released the data for the first 6 months of 2023, so just 6 months of the year, 500 million hours of people watching Adam Sandler movies on Netflix. Not just his new movies, but his old movies that they also license to the platform. So as much as we talk about being these sophisticated moviegoers who like to go to 70 millimeter IMAX and watch Oppenheimer, we then go home from the theater and we turn on Billy Madison, or we turn on Happy Gilmore, right, and rewatch these movies we've probably seen 100 times. So Adam Sandler again has a really lucrative deal with Netflix that allows him to make kind of just whatever he wants. He talked about one time on Jimmy Kimmel's show how every one of his movies was like a paid vacation. He would set his movies in Hawaii, or in the case of the one this year, in Paris, and so that he could film there and make a lot of money to do that. Or he comes up with a movie that has cast his wife and his daughters in it, or he does an animated movie. So the reason why he was a number one actor this year is he had 3 movies for Netflix, and he also did a stand-up comedy tour with 40 plus dates. So he's very, very prolific. He works very hard, at least as far as putting stuff out. But in that hard work, he also definitely enjoys himself.
That doesn't sound too bad. I would want to do a Forbes Talks Hawaii edition, take a page out of Adam Sandler's book. But before I let you go, I know you're a bit of a cinephile yourself. I want to talk about the Oscars. Were there any surprises last night? What did you think of the award show?
Yeah, I would just say I was surprised by how much people liked Poor Things. I mean, we're seeing this actually at the box office too. It's a very weird movie. Brittany, I think you've seen it. I don't know. It's hard R rated and just strange. I mean, all of Yorgos Lanthimos' movies are a little out there, and yet this movie has grossed over $100 million, surprisingly, at the box office. And within the Academy, people really, really liked it. It beat Barbie out in production design and costume design, and also landed Emma Stone her second Oscar. I think if you're looking at rising stars, Emma Stone now has 4 nominations and 2 Oscars at the age of 35. She just started producing. This was one of her first major movies that she was producing. And when you think about like what Margot Robbie did with her company Lucky Chap, that now is kind of like red hot and was the foundational building block of Barbie, Emma Stone is kind of set up for that too. Now she is more artistically inclined, than Margot Robbie, maybe being more commercially inclined. But Poor Things, apparently everyone loves this weird movie that in many ways was Barbie. I mean, one of the things when I watched the movie, I was like, the plot of this and the plot of Barbie are almost identical. So maybe there's some carryover there. But it seems like everyone in the Academy, as well as audiences, seem to really love that movie.
The plot of Poor Things was a lot like Barbie, and you did note it was hard R rated. I mean, that's a movie I wouldn't see with your parents. So how did it gross $100 million at the box office? Is it because of Emma Stone's performance, because of her name recognition?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think she might be a bigger movie star than we give her credit for because she hasn't been in like a giant blockbuster movie. She loves being in kind of more art house movies, and so because of that, maybe we're underrating how much people love her. Or I do think that there is a feeling among general audiences that if a movie is thought to be great, or this movie is the best picture of the year, oftentimes we see a bump there, even if it is like a Moonlight or The Shape of Water. I'm trying to think of like very obscure best picture winners. Oftentimes general audiences will be intrigued by that. So it could be, a prestige factor because Yorgos Lanthimos' other movies like The Favorite or The Lobster, The Killing of the Sacred Deer, these are not giant blockbuster movies by any means. I think, it is some combination of all those things. And it could honestly be, there's a lot of sex in this movie, and sex does sell. I mean, I think even if people talk about not taking their parents to it, I think that's very wise, Brittany, for the record. But there could be an element of that that people are intrigued by what the movie has to offer, and that brings them to theaters. Again, when you think about what people want to watch at home versus what they want to watch in theaters, those are two very different things. But I'm as surprised as anyone by the success of this movie.
Well, we will leave it there, Matt. Craig, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you come back on again soon.
Thank you, Brittany. Always a pleasure.